emotionally significant or emotionally compelling and the intellectually justified.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that marriage, you're golden.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just our talking about that letter that neither one of us has looked at in probably a little while now, and we remember it, and it sticks with us, and that's the goal, to get our communication to stick.
Hi, I'm Kyle Werkerly, certified professional ghostwriter. I'm glad you're listening as I welcome industry experts to share stories. You'll hear of lessons learned the hard way, overcoming professional hurdles, turning experience into actionable knowledge, and how to connect with your target audience. This is the Career Challenges Podcast. So welcome to the Career Challenges Podcast. I have with me Neil Gordon, and Neil Gordon is a communication expert. So Neil, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Kyle.
All right. And so when I first, heard of you, I can't remember exactly where, said you were a ghostwriter, but also you were talking about the silver bullet and how that really helped a lot of TED Talks. And you mentioned 46 out of 50 TED Talks kind of have this silver bullet that, gets people interested in them. And you mentioned Simon Sinek. I really love Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I've watched it, 100 times. And so you'd point out there's a silver bullet in his talk. Can you explain more about that and really kind of how it helps them in their speaking?
Absolutely. What we often see, not so much on the TED stage, but in other speeches and keynotes and things like that, is that we often find that there are a lot of speakers who think it's their job to provide a lot of information in the form of, like, maybe they have like a 7-step process for their how to succeed at business, or 5 hacks for beating weight loss, or whatever it is that they're going to be speaking about or talking about. And there's often a lot of good information there, but it winds up being kind of like a condensed version of a book in like 45-minute or 30-minute format or something like that. And what we see with Simon's talk, as well as a lot of these other super popular TED Talks, is that the entire 18 minutes or 12 minutes or whatever it is anchored by a single idea. The entire thing isn't 15 things you need to know about this or 8 things you need to know about that. It's one thing. It's one idea. And the format of the talk and how that one idea is incorporated can change from one talk to the next. Simon has a rather distinct way of doing his, as opposed to a lot of the other speakers. But either way, regardless of format, you come away from that speech not with this avalanche of content of information, but rather one thing to chew on, so that when you're going to break or you're walking away from your computer after having watched it, you're mulling that one thing over and it has a chance to land. And so this specific thing that happens in 46 of the 50 most popular talks is a 1-sentence explanation of that idea in this powerful way that when you say it, even if you don't really have any context for it, people just kind of light up and they have these light bulb moments, these aha kinds of things. And whether it's in a TED Talk like Simon's talk, or it's in a book, if you've ever read a business book or something like that on your Kindle, you might see how there are quotes, specific passages that are highlighted by a lot of people. And when you go through the book, you might find that the one with the most highlights is this particular kind of sentence that leads to this aha kind of moment. And so my work is in helping experts, people who have a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, to become the face of a movement with this big idea, with this silver bullet-like concept.
Awesome. So you said 46 out of 50 most popular. What made you decide to go look through the top 50 and analyze them, and probably watch them 100 times each, so that you could find maybe that one sentence? What gave you the idea to do that?
I actually really like this story, Kyle. I was working with a client. This is going back maybe to 2013 or something, 2014, somewhere around there. And I was working with him on a book proposal, and I was ghostwriting for him. And he he's a very wealthy guy. He was successful in a lot of different businesses, and he tried to put together a book that compiled all the different things he does to live an optimal life.
Hmm.
And there were like maybe 30 or 35 different concepts that he wanted somebody to incorporate into any given part of their day. And it was true to life. These are the things that he did. But he's also a super intense dude. And I mean, he's completely cut like an Adonis, and he has all of these high-end supplements that he takes every day, and he does this and he does that. And it's just like one thing after another after another. And in reading his material, I just went into shutdown mode. I'm a pretty motivated guy. I have a morning routine every day. I do all sorts of things to better myself. And he just completely overwhelmed me with what he wanted his readers to do. And I tried to make a case for paring it down, because I had in the back of my mind this sense that my best learning experiences going through life were these kind of aha moments that motivated me to learn more and to go deeper.
Yeah, one thing instead of like 30
things,
yeah.
Right? Even if you have a lot of content, you still anchor it. And I've talked about this with people before, but back then I tried to make a case for it. I remember calling it a binding theoretical construct. That was the term I used to explain it, to get him to get on board with it. And spoiler alert, he did not get on board with it, because who would with such a clunky, cumbersome term like that?
Yeah. It just doesn't have that ring like a silver bullet, you know?
Right. Exactly. And it took me a number of years actually to settle down on the silver bullet as the metaphor for this sentence. And obviously it's for certain reasons and all of that. But the funny thing about it all was that it might have been an abysmal term, but at least it planted the seed that this was a thing to look into. And not long after that, I was actually helping with a TEDx event in Southern California. And before I did that, I went through and watched all the TED Talks and figured out what it was. And so when I went up and met with the people at the TEDx event, I could say with some authority how important that exercise was.
Mm-hmm. So then what prompted you to, I guess, no longer do ghostwriting or book proposals, because you were working for Penguin Random House at the time, and go into, this speaking coaching? Where did that idea come from?
Well, I had been working mostly on book collaboration well into the 2010s. Mm-hmm. And what would often happen is that I would work with someone on a book project, and then they would realize that there was something to the work we were doing on a broader scale. And so they asked if I could help them with other things. And a perfect example of that is how a client of mine who I was helping with her book stuff was to give a keynote speech at her company's national conference. And she was replacing someone who was supposed to get paid tens of thousands of dollars. And so there was a lot at stake in regards to her doing it. And I just took the process of how I help people to structure content for a book, and I helped her to structure her talk. And it was experimental in nature. It was based on what I knew I wanted and had seen in a lot of public speaking, or was completely lacking in the public speaking. And we applied it to that, and she knocked it out of the park. I mean, she completely killed it. Everyone was jaw-droppingly gobsmacked by what she did. The CEO was just like, where did that come from? And she got invitations to give some version of that speech several more times afterwards, which is what I promised to people in my marketing, is that you give a speech in this way and people line up and want to work with you and stuff. And that's exactly what happened to her. And I worked with someone else who I'd worked out her silver bullet because I knew I wanted to do it, but we hadn't worked on her speaking as a speech. She was going to be appearing on TV, which is why we worked it out for her. And I happened to see her on the day. I mean, it was at a children's hospital. I happened to be volunteering there, and my shift was on the day that she was giving a 10-minute speech. And she was flustered and fretting over the fact that everyone was completely bored out of their minds whenever she gave a 10-minute speech about the program that she was the founder of and that I volunteered for. And I asked her, well, would you like me to help you with what you can say to them today? And she said, yes. And I took her aside. We worked out what she was going to say. And I asked her, usually they were like bored out of their minds, glazed over, just politely clapping at the end. And this time they were held rapt at attention from the moment she started speaking. And several people just like, they lined up with business cards. One person invited her to apply for a grant. And the conversation we had took 2 minutes. And it was the silver bullet that led to me being able to so quickly help her to work out the structure of her talk. Mm-hmm. And those were the two seeds that then finally, a very thick-headed guy, Kyle, a while figured out, I was like, wait a minute, I'm not sure how to market myself with the silver bullet thing. But then a big aha that I got sometime in the last 5 years was that when you're trying to market, like write copy for your Facebook ads or whatever, if you just talk about your solution, like if I was just going to talk about my silver bullet, no one would care. But maybe I could talk about the fear and anxiety of having a speech coming up and not being sure what to say and being afraid of everyone looking at their phones the whole time. Yeah. And ever since I started doing that in 2017, that was it. It just was a matter of knowing that I could help them no matter their content needs, but public speaking just happened to be the most accessible way to connect to their people who needed my help the most.
Sure. So when people hear that story of you turning her speech around in about 2 minutes, have you set the bar really high there? Do people come to you and assume, well, I'm going to talk to Neil for 2 minutes, have my answer, and then I'll go off and have the same results?
Well, for what it's worth, before that day, we had worked out that silver bullet. Then that process took a couple of hours.
Okay.
So we worked out her silver bullet over a consult over a couple of hours. And then she told me about a story that had happened to her the night before her 10-minute talk. And that's why she hadn't prepared or anything, is because of a really distressing thing that happened with one of the patients and his families. And that became the basis of the narrative of the talk. And the pieces just fell together like that. Like she already had the story ready, and not that she knew that at the time, but I figured out that would be exactly what she needed to start with, and then just go into the larger issues and just go from there. So, and plus the other thing is that I had been a volunteer at that particular program for several years by the time that conversation happened. So I was very intimately aware of what she did.
Okay. So,
but yeah, no, that does set the bar pretty high for sure.
Yeah, but there were certain criteria that made it work that one time really, really quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're working in the editorial department with Penguin Random House doing ghostwriting, and then now with speeches and helping people tell their stories. How do you approach each story individually? Are you still looking for that silver bullet within the story? Or are you trying to look for something, to kick it off and then tell the story?
It's an interesting question. And I don't know if you've been around this in your own work as a ghostwriter and everything, but I've found that a lot of people like to talk about the power of storytelling, but very few people talk about what makes a story powerful. And that's the thing that I've found is a very important missing ingredient in this conversation. And so the silver bullet has a particular role in storytelling, but it's interesting. Like, if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you a really quick story.
Please do.
As an example. When I was in 4th grade, my class did a production of The Jungle Book based on the Disney cartoon, and I played King Louie the orangutan. And I had a big song and dance number, and I was a total ham. I would eventually be a theater major in college and stuff like that. And I jumped around the stage and this and that and had a lot of fun with rehearsals. And then the very first time I had my costume was the first performance. And I had these brown tights on and a stuffed brown t-shirt and a wig and a mask and all of that, and these big furry gorilla slippers. And they were on my feet with these brown tights, and I'm kicking my legs every which way. And in the middle of my first performance, the left slipper falls off my foot and lands in the pit between the stage and the audience. And I had the 4th grade equivalent of an oh crap moment. And a split second later, I don't know what made me do it, but a split second later, I just hurled my right foot back and kicked the other slipper off as hard as I could. It sailed halfway back across the auditorium and everyone went berserk. And I used that device for every performance thereafter. Like I consciously and deliberately kicked off my slippers every performance. And I learned through that sometimes the greatest catastrophes have the greatest opportunities for success. Okay. Now that last sentence was like the lesson, right? The moral of the story. It's also the silver bullet. The silver bullet, which we haven't really quite covered, is this cause and effect relationship. It's like when you take this action, you lead to this outcome.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you experience a catastrophe, I mean, it's more implicit in this particular one. Like when you experience a catastrophe, when you mine out the opportunity in that, you can have much more success, kind of thing. That's like basically a more cumbersome way to say the exact same idea. So that's the silver bullet in the story. But what leads to the silver bullet? What is it about the story, the meat of the story, that makes that worth telling? And so give your listeners a chance to think about that. Why did that lesson come up? And the simple truth is that it's because of the slipper that slipped off. It's because I encountered an unexpected moment, a moment that I didn't expect to happen. And that led to me having to really quickly adapt. And that adaptation is what leads to the learning moment. It's what leads to the silver bullet. So when looking at storytelling and on stage or in a book, on the page, that sort of thing, the question to ask oneself is, what is it about this unexpected? What is it about this experience that was unexpected, whether for better or for worse? And how did I respond, or how did my client or whoever the story is about respond and adapt? And then what did they learn because of that? And so that's the basic framework of how stories fit into the silver bullet and winds up being actionable for creating compelling content.
Yeah. So I don't want to dissect the silver bullet too much, because we could get really, really deep here.
Of course.
But when you're telling a story, or when you're trying to get to that point where you give them the silver bullet and then they have that aha moment, are you trying to approach it more from an intellectual standpoint, or an emotional standpoint, or spiritual, or is it kind of a combination? Because the way I see it, just to give you some background of where I'm coming from,
Sure.
is with Simon Sinek's Start With Why. He says people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And for me, that was more of an intellectual aha moment. When I was watching Sir Ken Taylor talk about the education system, and he was explaining that we need to be helping our students to really learn for their emotional well-being. For me, that was more of an emotional connection. And so I'm always wondering, when you're setting up a silver bullet with the client, or just trying to analyze it, are you trying to look more for intellectual aha, or an emotional aha, or a spiritual aha?
It's a smart question, Kyle. And one of the things I teach my followers and my clients and whatnot is what I define as a truly compelling speech, something that's persuasive, something that really leads to some kind of meaningful change in the audience, is a marriage of the emotional and the intellectual as a single flow. And what's interesting about your citing the people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, as being a more intellectual aha, is that also comes back to the format that Simon in particular uses in that talk, because he uses the silver bullet as a mantra of sorts. I think he says that sentence 6 times throughout the talk.
Yeah.
And so it shows up very early on, and it shows up repeatedly. And so it's a repetition that is kind of training the mind in that way, and it becomes more intellectual. But if you watch someone like Jill Bolte Taylor's talk, her silver bullet is basically the second to last thing she says. She says this, it's pretty long actually, and I would butcher it if I tried to recite it from memory right now, but the basic gist of it is like, the more we operate from the inner peace of our right brain circuitry, the more peaceful our world will be, right? That action leads to that outcome. But she's saying it, and then she says, I thought that was an idea worth spreading. Thank you. And so it's the very, very end. And so that to me takes on a more emotionally significant tone because of the context, the format of what she's done. That being said, I tend to encourage my clients to utilize emotionally compelling devices or features to make that aha moment more of getting chills kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's more like a combination. And how do we do that? It's like building up with story. It's planting a mystery, perhaps. I often like to plant mysteries. Dan Pink's TED Talk on the puzzle of motivation is a really good example of planting a mystery early on. And he keeps saying there's this mismatch between what science knows and what business does, but he doesn't reveal it until about 2/3 of the way into the talk. And so when he says it, I can't speak for other people's experience of his talk, but when he says his silver bullet, that the secret to high performance is not rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive to do things because they matter. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a strictly intellectual response to that. I was like, oh, wow. And it's just like, I just have this moment of just like, that's just powerful. And it's so I would be hesitant to say that was a plainly intellectual or plainly emotional response. Mm-hmm. I would say it's more the context of the silver bullet that takes on both of those qualities in combination.
Sure. That's a good answer. Because part of me is always wondering, can we make it 100% pure intellectual, 100% pure emotional? Yeah. And, as things are in life, you never can get to that. You never can say this action is entirely wrong and that action is entirely right. So,
right. I'd like to say that, I'd like to say that the only hard and fast rule of communications is that there are no hard and fast rules.
Every rule there's exceptions to every rule, including this rule.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But, it's also Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And, Simon Sinek touches on it, but also I went back and read a lot of his stuff after high school, after college, because, they talk about it in school. And to be honest, growing up, he was just a figure to me, like Christopher Columbus and Abraham Lincoln, all those people that you get those important days off from, so you don't have to go to school. But it wasn't until later that I actually read his stuff, particularly Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And he explains, why he's doing what he's doing. And of course, touching back on what Sinek said, that, they buy why you do it. And, it really started to hit me that Martin Luther King, his overarching goal, of course, was equality, no matter what your skin color was, equality. He wanted everyone to have the same opportunities, the same, chances. He didn't want a cop to pull over somebody with darker skin and automatically assume this is a bad person. He wanted to prevent that. But when he got to the why, it was because he saw his own children begin to hate white children. And he wanted to stop that. And that really touched me because, by that time I was a dad. And so that changes your perspective so much, or it did for me anyway. And so to me, it made King more of a human being to me because he's a father. I'm a father, and that was a connection there as well. But also he's pointing out that there was just so much hate in the world, and he wanted to stop that. And if it meant bringing equality to the masses, then that's what he was going to do, because for the sake of his own children. And for me, it like going back to what you're saying, there is that intellectual, there is that intellectual argument he's making that the color of your skin should not matter, but not the color of their skin, but the content of their character. But from an emotional one, it was for a better tomorrow for my children. And so, that really just brought it to me in such a crystal moment. It wasn't like I had, the lights all went on or anything, but looking back, I realized that's what happened with that moment. And it was really quite amazing. So.
Yeah. And that letter in particular, you probably have a more intimate knowledge of it than I do in any given detail of the content, but it's a great example. And I do recommend that your listeners check it out because he brings a very compelling way of communicating to his execution of that letter. And it's funny, I was working on content for a client a number of years ago, and he spoke at this thing called the Newark Peace Summit in New Jersey. And this is going back to like 2011, I believe, or something like that. And Dr. King's son, Martin Luther King the third, he was one of the panelists, and he introduced an analogy that talks about the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat, whereas the thermometer simply records the temperature, but a thermostat regulates the temperature. And he makes the point that we are making that much more meaningful of a stand for our life and the impact we're going to have, not just simply by being a passive observer of the world around us, but somehow regulating a different world than the one we see. Mm-hmm. And when he used that analogy, everyone started clapping. And it was this really compelling moment, because analogies are such a powerful way to help people to be engaged. Mm-hmm. And that analogy, I didn't find out until years later, was mentioned by Dr. King in that letter to a Birmingham jail.
Wow. I'm gonna have to go back and read that now.
Yeah, right.
I just remember that one moment that I just explained, and not the thermostat thermometer.
Yeah. It's really quite interesting, and so it's a real credit to the idea, the larger idea we're talking about, that the most effective communication tends to incorporate both the emotionally significant or emotionally compelling and the intellectually justified. Mm-hmm. And so with that marriage, you're golden. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just our talking about that letter that neither one of us has looked at in probably a little while now, and we remember it, and it sticks with us, and that's the goal, to get our communication to stick.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Would you like to be a guest on the Career Challenges podcast? Go to careerchallengespodcast.com to find out how. While you're there, check out other episodes and download them through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, Castbox, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more. The Career Challenges podcast is hosted by me, Kyle Weckerly. I'm a certified professional ghostwriter who works with business thought leaders and industry experts to write polished manuscripts, assess their publishing options, and create book marketing plans. I've worked with consultants, high-ticket salespeople, coaches, speakers, C-level executives, and business owners. My authors have worked for USAA, Vistage, Booz Allen Hamilton, Austin Technology Council, and the John Maxwell team. My authors want to write a book to serve as a platform for their marketing endeavors. They know that becoming an author will help them secure speaking gigs, market their expertise, promote a product or service, and more. Are you ready to turn your experience, knowledge, and stories into actionable advice and connect with your ideal client? Then visit WeckerlyWriter.com to schedule a consultation today and begin your publishing journey. That's WeckerlyWriter.com. WeckerlyWriter.com. And now, back to the Career Challenges podcast. So you'd mentioned analogies and how powerful they are. Yeah. And, of course, people using stories and setting it up. Has anyone wanted to use a fiction story in their speech or in their marketing content and just kind of hang everything on that? Has that ever happened with you and your clients?
A fiction story. So it would be essentially drawing on like a movie or a novel or something like that.
Like a popular one that a lot of people use in writing is Star Wars, and they talk about the monomyth and how Luke fulfills all the parts of the monomyth, and they hang a lot of it on that. So has anyone kind of done something similar like that with you or one of your clients?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I actually use fiction in my content, and when I teach people. I was just speaking a little over a week ago at a conference, and I introduced the little engine that could as an example of what we need to do. Instead of just overwhelming our audiences with information, we need to do something different. And so as the story goes, the train breaks down on one side of the mountain, and these other two trains, one that's really new and sleek and shiny, and he's too busy, he doesn't have the time, and an old rusty train engine who's really old and doesn't have the energy. And they both say, no, I'm not taking this train over the mountain. And the little engine does. And she goes up and she says, I think I can, as we all remember. And she makes it over the mountain, and she didn't make it over the mountain because she knew more than the other two. She didn't have more information. Mm-hmm. The fundamental difference between her and the other two, and the reason why she was empowered and they weren't, is because she believed that she could. And it's fundamentally the thing about a powerful speech and compelling book content and all that is that you incite this belief that change is possible.
Mhm.
And so people are empowered not by knowledge, not by that which they know is true, but rather that which they believe is possible.
Mhm.
And that becomes the basis of the silver bullet. And the silver bullet is as powerful as it is because that aha moment leads to a belief that they could do something with it. And so fiction, when used with precision and deftness, can actually be quite powerful
Mhm.
in illustrating a concept. And what's nice is that because people are familiar with the story, if they are, they're suddenly at home. They're like, I think it was someone like, maybe it was Sigmund Freud who said analogies add nothing, but they do help us to feel more at home. Or so. I'm butchering that quote too, but that's the thing, is like they help people to settle down and feel like they belong there.
Mhm.
And that opens them up to learning what it is you have to say. And so, yeah, I mean, there was a real time example of it. I'm sure that I've done that with other people too, although admittedly in more recent years, there's been a lot more non-fictional stories. I do remember that the book, I think it was The One Thing,
Mhm.
is a very popular how-to book that came out a few years ago.
Jay Papasan, right? The One
Yeah,
Thing.
I think so. Yeah. And he's very much into the movie City Slickers in that book.
Okay.
And City Slickers, and do you remember the movie? Because like,
Oh, a long time ago. I'm
Jack
really dating
Palance,
myself. I think we rented that on VHS, not from Blockbuster, but from our neighborhood
neighborhood video store. Yep.
video store, Figuritos. It was called Figuritos.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we probably both rented it and also watched it on HBO back then. And so Jack Palance plays this cowboy,
Mhm.
and after he's done scaring the crap out of Billy Crystal for the first third of the movie, they become friendly. And he's just like, you want to know what the secret to life is? And he holds up his finger. He's just pointing his one finger. It's this. He's like, Billy Crystal, like, your finger? And he's just like, one thing. All the rest of it don't mean. And then he's used the S word. And it's just like, he won the Academy Award for that. So we very much appreciate his stellar performance of that particular character.
I didn't know Palance won for that.
Yeah, he won Best Supporting Actor. I'm pretty sure he did, because then there was this whole right. He did, because in the movie he says, like, when Billy Crystal's character says, like, snipes at him, he just says in response, "I crap bigger than you." And then
I remember that.
Yeah, and then he gets the award, the Oscar, and he gets up on stage and he's just like, Billy Crystal, I crap bigger than him. And the following year, Billy Crystal went on a long streak of hosting the Academy Awards, like, throughout the 90s. I remember.
Yeah, I remember watching him a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, he was on there a lot. And the following year, Palance is pulling this big, like, cart thing, set piece with, like, maybe he was just pulling it, or was he pulling it with his teeth or something? And on that float type thing was Billy Crystal, like, as the, Palance was like, yeah. So this is a whole thing. How did we get off on this?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's what I love about stories. And Billy Crystal was great because looking back on the movie now, what I do remember of it, like, they would set up the lines for Palance, and he had some really great one-liners because I remember early in the movie, of course, Crystal's like, this guy's crazy. Look at his eyes. He's crazy. Palance comes walking up. He goes, hey, how's it going? Kill anybody today? Day's not over.
Day ain't over yet. Yeah.
Day's not over yet. And he keeps walking. Everyone's looking at each other like, one of us is going to die. One of us is going to die. And that's stuck in my head so much because, like, I've wanted to say that to certain people in life at those certain times. Is like, day's not over.
Yeah, exactly.
But it never shows up, which is frustrating.
Yeah, but Kyle, that's the whole thing, is that what you've hit upon with using fiction, and through the couple of examples we know it does happen, it sticks in people's minds because they're walking around thinking about movie. I do. I mean, when I started,
I watched way too many movies as a kid. I know way too many lines that aren't helping me at all in my career.
I mean, the idea of, like, somebody posted on one of my Facebook ads yesterday a quote from Blazing Saddles, and I was right there with a GIF right away. Like, I could go quote for quote on Blazing Saddles. I could go quote for quote on a lot of Mel Brooks. on Monty Python. There's practically a whole scene I've memorized. And if I'm able to do a speech someday, and somehow I can talk about Dennis the constitutional peasant from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, it's just like strange women lying in ponds distributing swords. There's no basis for a system of government. And if there's a way for me to work in my horrible, atrocious British accent on stage, you damn right they're going to remember that.
Yeah. It's like, just because some watery tot threw a sword at you doesn't make you king.
Yeah, it's just like if I said some moistened bint, like it's just like, what's a moistened bint?
Yeah, what is this? And
like, oh, now we see the violence inherent in the system.
Yeah, and what frustrates me too is like, in college we all watched that way too much. We were quoting it back and forth to each other, and some of the people I've worked with or interacted with who may be a little younger than me. I just want to say a little. I want to emphasize that point, a little. I'll say that quote and smile, and they look at me like I'm an idiot. I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. I just have to walk off because you can't explain it in that situation. This is Monty Python. This is the joke.
Yeah,
here's the setup.
All the comedy is gone at that moment.
You just walk away. You lick your wounds, and then hopefully the sun comes up tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But conversely, Kyle, I offer that when someone just kind of like leaks out of a random movie quote and you know it and you call it, you people the two of you are bonded for life. Like, I mean, that's the thing. And so maybe not everyone's going around thinking about these movie quotes, but let's say that some percentage of the population is. If you're up on stage using this kind of material, or you write about it in your book, or you do something like that, and the analogy is sound, it's going to stay with your audience for the rest of their lives. I mean, I am able to refer back to, you asked me this question, I hadn't thought of it that way, and yet I still thought of the one thing and the example that leads, because it stuck.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, I love that movie. And then, so here we are.
Yeah, true. I remember English teachers. All my English teachers were unique in my memory for some reason, and that should have been a sign then that I should have gone into English instead. I went into art, which was not a smart move. Anyway, but yeah, I took Brit Lit in college, and the very first day, our teacher comes in, Professor Kimry. He goes, I'm Professor Kimry, and you can call me Professor Kimry, or the more daring of you can call me, oh, Captain, my Captain. And he just went off. Yeah. And in that moment, I'm like, wait a minute, I know that line. Yeah. And I went back and I watched Dead Poets Society. Robin Williams quotes it. Yep. That was what made me go read Walt Whitman and then read the poem and understand kind of what went on behind the poem. And so now I got the joke, and I used it with somebody else at another job, and she laughed because she saw the quote. She thought it was funny.
She knew the movie,
yeah. And so like there's those instances where it is technically a movie quote, but they're actually quoting something much older and longer running, and I think that that speaks well of that quote and what goes along with it and everything. And then it pulls in something so much broader or so much deeper, I should say, not broader, but deeper. And that's what I liked about that, because when I went back and watched Dead Poets Society since then, it made so much more sense to me and it had so much more impact. And it wasn't not really a silver bullet moment for me, but seeing more of what the character in the teacher, Robin Williams' character in Dead Poets Society, was trying to do with these young boys. And it was like, now I get it. And I want to do that with words now. And so
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And let's circle back then to the original moment. The inciting incident was that your professor said, you can call me Professor, whatever his name is, or the more daring among you could call me, oh, Captain, my Captain. It was so easy. It was so little effort for him just to do a little bit of that circles back to the unexpected thing too, is that he was just very straightforward and then had this unexpected reference, right? And here we are talking about it however many years later, and it's another moment that stuck.
Mhm.
And that is just such an important thing for your listeners and all of us as a whole to remember, is that you somehow just disrupt the way we typically go about doing some kind of presentation or something like that. And it's going to stay with people forever.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to be that hard.
true. True. And so you mentioned, that moment that stuck, he broke the script. When you're helping people put together their speeches and how they're going to tell their story, do you always try to get them to do that at least one time in their speech to try and break the script so that the audience kind of stops? They feel they're on this path, and then you break the script and, oh wait, what was that? And you have them.
I try to avoid being too dogmatic about checking off all the boxes of needs to happen. I find that a lot of my clients are more experts in their field and not quite as comfortable with speaking as doing the work that they do, kind of thing. I mean, I work with some professional speakers, but more often than not, I'm working with experts who are looking at speaking as a means to another end. And so I have to suss out how comfortable they're going to feel with the riskier things, because it's not just doing it, it's also selling the device.
Okay.
And so I have to suss that out. And I find that by and large, I just launched a speaker quiz just a few days before we put together this thing. And one of the speaker types is definitely riskier and more ambitious than the others, or two of them. Two of them are requiring a bit more risk, where you're messing with your audience is one of the types, and another one is just being very theatrical and like the Monty Python thing or something like that. And so not everyone feels comfortable with those things, and I don't want to feel like that anyone has to do all the things in order to be effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you brought it up before I could. I was going to bring up your speaker quiz.
Oh.
But you identified these 5 kind of speaker archetypes within your quiz. Do you want to touch on them just briefly? You don't have to go into.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and it's a fun, loving, light thing. And what I often teach people, this is a nice tip for your listeners, is that people, when they're introduced on stage, they often will visit for a bit and say, "Oh, thank you so much, and it's so nice to be here. And how about a nice round of applause for the person for so-and-so, whoever just introduced them. Isn't so-and-so great?" kind of thing. And it's a well-meaning but highly misguided way to start your speech, usually, in that there's a lot of juice and tension in how you start your speech by just walking out on stage and taking maybe half a beat and just starting with a compelling story or an opening question or a really interesting moment or a demonstration or something like that, or a game, whatever it is. You start right off and you really milk the tension that starts at the beginning of a speech. What this quiz does is these 5 types are all about the different ways you could engage your audience in that opening moment, as well as throughout the rest of the speech. And so the elephant is more of this kind of tender, nurturing, even sometimes introverted type, who, think of Brene Brown and Susan Cain, who does a TED Talk on introverts, and Amy Cuddy. There's a softer, tender quality of their storytelling. And so that's their task is to nurture. So their opening might be this tender, vulnerable story. And then the owl is the more cerebral, intellectual type, who often has the most danger in giving too much information and technical know-how. And their way of drawing people in might be through a game or a demonstration or a lesson of some sort that's experiential for the audience. And you could start off very powerfully with that. Bo Lotto is a Scandinavian fellow, I think, and he's given a couple of TED Talks, one on optical illusions, and he starts with a game instead of just a lot of dry information. And then we have the monkey, which is the more mischievous speaker type. They can mess with their audience, which is more to your question, like really throwing them for a loop or something. And Tim Urban gives a very popular talk on procrastination, and he just lies. He tells a story and he just lies to his audience and said, "This is the greatest term paper we've ever seen." And then it's actually they didn't say that at all. It was terrible. but he kind of messes with his audience and misdirects them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the monkey misdirects. And then the bird of paradise, which is a very theatrical bird, the male bird, just like all of these crazy.
Yeah, Planet Earth, I remember seeing that, doing a whole
right?
dance thing. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I learned about it too. And it was just like these crazy theatrical choreographed ways to mate with the female. And so not that this is about mating, but it is about theatricality and being very choreographed. And so I like to tell a story of how my first job out of college was in stacking boxes at a napkin factory, and my manager was Scottish, and I'd talk about how he looks at me as this recent college grad. He's like, "Don't gotta be a rocket scientist to do this job." And I love it. And it's just this wonderful theatrical moment. So that's Bird of Paradise. It's like being super theatrical. Mm-hmm. And then the final one is the chameleon, which is what I'm steering people toward, is just being this master of adaptation. Of sometimes it's good to have this tender moment. Sometimes it's good to be theatrical. Sometimes this, or sometimes you adapt your talk to this audience or that one, that sort of thing. And so the riskier two are the monkey and the bird of paradise, because you're either messing with your audience or you're really going over the top.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I did take your speaker quiz, and do you want to guess which one I was? Yeah, I'm putting you on the spot here.
You definitely got a lot of an owl-like quality to you. And I would say that I would have to choose between owl and chameleon.
Oh.
Well, which one was? Maybe I'm 0 for 2 here. What are we looking at?
No, I was a chameleon. Don't worry.
You were a chameleon.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there we go. Good. Yeah,
awesome.
See, I feel that that's the ghostwriter in you, because you, by your nature, need to adapt to your client's voice and to your client's expertise. And so that doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it doesn't surprise you. I was hoping I would, break the script there.
Yeah. I mean, I want everyone who takes the quiz to really feel good about whatever they get, because it's just always a matter of serving the audience. Mm-hmm. And if you're feeling nervous about speaking, then lean on your speaker type and go for that. And then over time, develop toward that more chameleon quality. And if you already get a chameleon, then you're halfway there. And then it's just a matter of being strategic and how you use that capacity for adaptation moving forward.
Awesome. So what was yours? Yeah. So have you taken your own quiz, and then what was your speaker type?
I am definitely a chameleon now, but if years ago, I would have definitely been a bird of paradise. Mm. I mean, I went to.
Yeah, you mentioned the theater major. Yeah,
theater major, and when I was in New York, a friend of mine and I split an Airbnb, and we went to see a bunch of shows. This is back this past May, and we went to see an all Yiddish production of Fiddler on the Roof.
Really?
And yeah,
did they actually speak in Yiddish, or was it?
They spoke and sang in Yiddish the entire time, and then there were super titles on either side of the proscenium. And I was so annoying for my poor friend. I just kept inserting random Yiddish words that had nothing to do with the actual libretto. So there's that big song tradition. Yeah. And so I inserted my own Yiddish word that had nothing to do with the reality. I just said fakakta. And I'm just doing all these random reenactments of that show. And she was a trooper. She dealt with it. But that's the bird of paradise. It's just, after a show, you're just reenacting all of the different moments and stuff. And that's who I was and I still have that in me, obviously. How many ridiculous voices have come into our conversation today, but but it's but I am very conscious of adapting my stuff, and I just adapted my Silver Bullet material to a whole other name. I gave it a whole other name when I was speaking a little over a week ago, and so that's where adaptation comes in.
Awesome. So we're almost out of time here, but I do want to ask. I want to ask all my guests too. What is next for Neil Gordon? What's next for you?
That is a really good question. I appreciate it, Kyle. I am now, with the quiz up and launched, I'm now decompressing a little bit, but I believe the next phase is going to be my working on my own book proposal. I've worked on book proposals for other people, but I'm pretty sure it's time to develop the material for the page around the silver bullet and put that out into the world and see what comes of it. I guess I'm talking about it with you and your listeners, so I guess I have to make that happen.
Yeah. So we're gonna hold you to it.
Yeah, you're gonna have to hold me accountable, so that
me and my one fan will hold you to it.
Oh, stop! We'll be sharing it. We're gonna find. We're gonna have your audience and all of that.
Awesome. And so if people are listening to this and they're like, I at least want to look into speaking. I don't know if it's my thing yet, but I at least want to look into what Neil is doing. How can they find you?
I would say come to visit me at neilcanhelp.com, neilcanhelp.com. And there's a blog and there's other content that you can get. I do recommend you check out my free training on the silver bullet, and that will teach you more, give you more examples. And you can, obviously there's always the opportunity to go deeper from that point on if you want, but that's often where people can start because it's a bit more accessible, like to do like a self-led training at first and stuff like that. And all of that. And and there's some good stuff on there, and it would probably, I've seen people actually do a lot of powerful stuff. I know one person who never even hired me, and she used that tip around starting your speech without any preamble and thank you so much, it's so nice to be here. And she got her first standing ovation, and she made almost 6 figures in sales that day. So there's a lot of good content to be had that isn't just you just have to pay for. But there obviously is always an opportunity to go deeper too.
Awesome. And then can they find the quiz there too on your website?
I am actually going to give you another link they can go to directly.
Awesome.
They can go to neilcanhelp.com/quiz.
Yes. And I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Okay, great. And then they can do that. And I'm still testing the best format for the quiz. And when that happens, then I'm going to put that as the main next thing you could do on my website as well. It's just, you've caught me right after I've launched it on Facebook. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm going to, once I have a little more data from everyone and what they like the most, I will then put that on the website as well.
Awesome. Well, Neil, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today.
I very much appreciate any opportunity to draw upon City Slickers and Monty Python Holy Grail is absolutely welcome by Miko.
Yes. And anyone that I can talk movie quotes with is always welcome.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you for listening to the Career Challenges Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and like the Career Challenges Podcast on your favorite podcasting app. Visit careerchallengespodcast.com for more information. Schedule your free consultation with Kyle Weckerly by visiting weckerlywriter.com today. That's WECKERLYWRITER.com. Thank you.